Hey guys, so I did my midterm film review on the movie The Manchurian Candidate, obviously the original that was released in 1962. I originally saw this film when I was in college the first time about 10 years ago. I watched it for a pop culture in the 1950s course that I was taking, and I actually fell in love with the film then. Since then, I have watched the remake starring Denzel Washington, and I actually prefer the original, which is unusual for me because I'm not a movie buff. It's probably the only movie I've ever voluntarily watched that was released even before I was born. So that says a lot about the film itself. It was directed by John Frankenheimer. He was known for producing mostly social dramas during this time. Also some suspense films. More importantly, stars Frank Sinatra. So if that doesn't reel you in, I don't know what will. Lawrence Harvey is also in this film, the main character. So the film itself, the genre is very clearly Cold War era, but it also falls a little bit into the Vietnam genre and the civil rights genre, just in some of the aspects that it shows that are a little actually ahead of its time, because this film was early 60s, which was before these other genres kind of started making their way into the mainstream. A lot of John Frankenheimer's films were that way. They were a little bit ahead of their times as far as the social issues, because he was known for his social dramas. So in this movie, it opens with a really strong sense of patriotism. It opens in the Korean War in 1952, and you see the soldiers and you see them winning their awards and coming back, and everyone is so stoked to see them. So it shows a really strong sense of patriotism here. And it shows, too, very quickly how politics can cause us to exploit our families and our friends and do some terrible things. It also has an element of the traditional Hollywood film, in that it shows these elements of wealth and glamour that you don't always see in the Cold War films. And that's one of the reasons that I really like it, because I feel like it really encompasses all of these different genres in this one film. So essentially, what happens in this film is some soldiers have come back from the Vietnam War, and they have been brainwashed by Russian communists. And so what we see happening is this fear-mongering of communism that's so strong during this era anyway, taking place throughout this whole movie. Essentially, it's solidifying everyone's worst fears of what the Russians are trying to do, which is why it mostly, before anything else, is a Cold War film. Let me turn this paper over. As far as the civil rights that we see in it, we actually, in this film, first of all, this film has several black characters. Can I say black? I did. I'm just going to keep rolling now. It has several African American characters in it, which is very, very unusual for the early 60s. Typically, these characters are segregated either into their own films or just not shown at all. So for it to have a main character who's African American, and then an entire room full of African American women shown in one scene, is really a strong social indication. And again, that comes from the director and his inclination towards the social dramas. It kind of highlights America as this moral high ground. And there's something it does specifically in the film, that guilt is something that is uniquely American. And it's obviously, it's a Russian communist who is saying this, saying that morally Americans are the only ones that feel guilt. And watching it now, I don't think that necessarily you get the same sense that you would have watching it then. Because watching it then, what they're doing is they're putting America on this pedestal by saying that. While it's a Russian saying it in a negative connotation, it inspires more patriotism and more loyalty to the U.S. and more fear of the Russians. Again, another theme you see throughout this is it's showing communists as unlikely villains. It's people that you wouldn't expect. As you watch through the movie, it's really actually very difficult to see the end coming. But essentially what happens is the people who are crying communist the whole time, calling everyone else a communist for every little thing, are the people who end up actually being the Russian spies or the communists at the end. And the one who is brainwashed, is a politician's son, and he's well loved by everyone, and he's being used as a Russian weapon. And so it just takes all of those elements of Cold War film and puts them in this movie. And then, like I said, you see the civil rights movement. Obviously, you see some of the Korean or the Vietnamese influence from the war in this film. And you see the traditional Hollywood in this film also. And I think it just does a really good job encompassing all of that into one film in a way that other films in that time weren't doing. On top of that, I think that the acting is really top notch, especially for what they were pulling off. These actors were going from a state of their day-to-day lives to this dream state, to this being brainwashed. And they're having to act on all these scenes in these different ways. And I think that Lawrence Harvey does a really fantastic job of that, as does Frank Sinatra. And I think that is very well done, especially for during that time. Overall, obviously, I'm a big fan of this movie. It is one of the few movies that I can watch over and over again and actually enjoy it. It's definitely a movie that you have to pay attention to. I feel like with a lot of horror movies or atomic era movies, you can kind of miss bits and pieces. And I'm not a movie watcher. I have a hard time sitting still or finding time to sit still for 2 hours and watch an entire film. So I'm very frequently in and out of a room during a movie, and most of the time that's fine. I can do that. I can still function. I can still watch the movie. I can kind of fill in the blanks for what I missed. This is not a movie where you can do that. You have to sit. You have to pay attention through the whole thing, because if you miss even just a second, you've completely missed out on what's happening, and you can't catch back up. But I highly recommend this film to everyone. I think that you should all actually go watch it. Watch the original. If you can't do black and white, then you shouldn't be taking this class, probably. I've learned that the hard way. But if you can't do black and white, you can watch the remake, but the remake is even more difficult to follow. And so I would highly recommend this, and I'll put a link in the comments just in case anybody wants to watch it. So thank you for watching me go on and on and on for the last, I don't know how long I've been talking now. I hope it's more than 4 minutes. I think it might be, but there's no timer on this. So anyway, have a good night. Have a good midterm break. And that's all.